Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today for this webinar hosted by Protiviti and Mutuitech. As you all know, the subject matter is end-user developed application, EUDAs. Are we still hiding in the organization's shadow? I guess, so I'd like to welcome you all today. I'd like to thank Andy, Mark, and Alex for joining as panelists today. I think just as sort of my opening remarks, as a EUDAs, as many of you probably heard me say before, probably the most widely understood risk, but the frequently least addressed within organizations. Protiviti and Mutuitech, through its Class 7 application, have had many years in helping organizations address EUDA risks. Protiviti, from a policy and framework perspective, Cluster 7 provides, Mutuitech, provides an application in Cluster 7 to help support those frameworks. I mean, if I look back at the journey that we've been on from a regulatory perspective, EUDAs have come into the spotlight, whether it's originally back in the early 2000s from SOX, whether it's SOX, CCAR, Solvency II, Basel with a risk data aggregation. And then more recently this year, again, EUDAs still come into the spotlight. Over in the US in August, we had the OCC model risk handbook, which started talking about EUDAs, probably in reaction to Citibank's fine and consent order a couple of years ago. And then more recently in September, the PRA's Dear CEO letter, calling out serious failings in the reg reporting, and again calling out spreadsheets as a key issue. Rebecca, if you just go to the next slide, please. So today's agenda is a sort of whistle-stop tour of the EUDA landscape. For those who now recognise the EUDA risk, we're going to talk through sort of the general components of a EUDA control framework. Technology has advanced over the last 10, 15 years at an exponential rate. And so there are many other types of applications that are considered as EUDAs. It's not just the humble spreadsheet or Access database. And as we've described, once we understand that landscape and understand the frameworks, to talk about how technology can support those frameworks and those controls. And really just to wrap it up in terms of being able to understand the regulatory landscape and just trying to, I guess, pull together all of those different strands. It's never just one single regulation that drives the edge. There is a multitude of things that drive us to address this risk. So what I'd like to do now is just ask the other panelists to introduce themselves and then get on with the discussion. So Andy, could I ask you to start first, please?
Thank you very much, Henry. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'm Andrew Poor. I'm a senior manager within the technology risk team within Protiviti. I've been working with the EUDAs over the past 15 years, and we've been working with Henry and the Cluster 7 Mutuitech team for about 10 years now. And over the course of that time, I've seen lots of different types of EUDAs, ranging from just your basic spreadsheets to more complicated programmable language, where EUDAs can be created for analysis purposes as well. My background initially was in internal audit, primarily focused on the IT audit side, but over the course of the years, I've moved through along to the technology risk side of things itself, and we do everything from training internal audit teams around the management and review of highly complex EUDAs to actually helping organizations implement an end-to-end process around managing their EUDAs, monitoring and implementing a sustainable process along the way. And I've been with Protiviti for the past 15 years, yeah, thoroughly enjoyed working here.
Thanks, Andy. Alex?
Sure, yeah. So Alex Abaro, Sales Director at Mutuitech. So I'm probably going to bring more of a technology flavour to today's conversations. As Andy mentioned, kind of we've worked together quite closely for a number of years. My experience in this area really comes from supporting a number of organisations, I guess, across banking, insurance, asset management around the EUDA challenge and how they approach that. But I guess more of my experience comes from the ongoing support and maintenance of those. And what do you do beyond sort of day one in terms of defining what the EUDA is? Thanks, Henry.
Thanks. And last and definitely not least, Mark, how are you doing, sir? Introduce yourself.
Very well, thank you indeed. Hi, Mark Wilson. I'm at Handelsbanken, a Swedish-based bank, looking after its UK presence. I've been with the organisation for over 30 years now, and I guess for many years I've been working on projects. A lot of my time was in a capital markets division, so well aware of the risks we carry through use of Excel, mostly. We recognise the risks that we carry through EUDAs, so we're on an initiative at the moment to create governance and organisational ownership responsibility for our EUDAs, trying to get our head around the scale of the challenge. As Henry alluded to, technology has improved, so the ability of our users to create more complex solutions for business problems has grown. But then I'm also very aware of the other side of it. Do we bring PowerPoint presentations into our EUDA coverage? These are things that have been normally created through cut and paste from Excel in the first place, have been presented as internal MI, which will drive business decisions. But as you can imagine, the scale of the challenge, if we think like that, becomes quite daunting. So we're trying to address these in the form of risks to the business. And yes, it's an enjoyable challenge. I use the term enjoyable loosely. Please appreciate.
Excellent, Mark. Thank you for that intro. And Rebecca, maybe if we can go to the next slide. So I guess as I guess Mark has alluded to, EUDAs can sometimes seem like quite a daunting challenge to address, and that's certainly some of the reactions we've had from clients. And I guess just for those who don't know me, so I'm now managing director of GRC strategy at EUDA and previously was CEO of Cluster 7. So and as Andy alluded to, we've worked alongside each other at a number of organisations where, as Mark described, it is daunting looking at the EUDA landscape and where do you start? And like anything, and any problem that we face in any organisation, it's important that we put a framework and a plan in place. And really, as depicted on the slide here, it starts with defining the problem, in ensuring all the stakeholders are aware and putting that framework and reporting in place so that we are able to fully scope the issue and then define the issue, scope it within the organisation, and then put the mitigating controls in place. I guess, Andy, maybe to start with on this first subject, maybe you could just sort of give people some insight into, put some of those leading practices in putting that EUDA governance in place.
Yes, I think one of the things that we when we typically talk to our clients about EUDAs and EUDA management is around sort of they want to sort of get an understanding of what that end-to-end process might look like. And what we do typically recommend is if you don't have anything in place currently, then it's recommended that you follow these sort of 4 simple steps, so to speak, around putting a EUDA governance in place for that organization, whether it's all for the organization as a whole or within sort of departments where you're using a lot of different types of EUDAs as well, and we'll come to that later on. But in terms of that end-to-end process itself, what we say is just to keep things sort of simple for now, is looking at sort of the policy and framework around the EUDAs itself. So that's the overarching lens around making sure that from the onset people understand the policies and procedures around the EUDAs and the expectations, and then Going down the next level, looking at the organization and the sustainability of implementing these standards and these policies, and making sure that people do have an understanding and an appreciation of it, and they're able to then sort of implement some of these things that you've defined out. Because I think often what you typically would get is you'd have something in place, but then it sort of gets lost further down the line where people don't know that it exists or don't quite understand how you can put in some of these controls and frameworks in place. And then thirdly, looking at the reporting and sort of almost monitoring perspective to say, okay, making sure that as part of that sustainable process itself, we're able to understand, what the risks are. We're able to also understand what the view is in terms of your inventory of EUDAs you may have within a certain department or a certain area within the organization itself. And being able to report on that, so that at any one point, if the regulators or external auditors we're coming in to do an audit of your EUDAs or your business processes, then you're able to say these are our key processes and these are the key EUDAs that are in place that we understand, and their complexity and the controls around that. And then finally, leveraging technology to be able to help ease the workload with monitoring and reporting on those EUDAs as well. And again, you can have various different types of technology, ranging from initial discovery of your inventory over to a period in time monitoring and sort of running a risk report on your EUDAs and the possible sort of control breaches that they might have on the EUDAs. Or finally, you can also have technology which monitor actual changes to your EUDAs as well, so that you're able to keep an audit log of all the changes. And as part of that, you're reviewing attestation around maintaining those user controls as well going forwards. So I think from that point of view, it's important to have these four things. And I think sometimes you often get organizations where they want to maybe skip a step or move to a different step without going in a sequence around that. And sometimes it can be quite challenging because you need to make sure you have those foundational things in place, such as your policy and framework, so that you establish those ground rules initially, and to be able to then communicate that to the wider audience within the organization as well.
No, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, as you say, Andy, setting out either a department-wide or, more importantly, hopefully a firm-wide policy for EUDAs is important. I mean, Mark, you said initially that it can be quite daunting, all these different technologies, and I mean, what's your advice or your experience in trying to, I guess, sort the wheat from the chaff in terms of defining what is a EUDA and what is just an application that sits on the network that shouldn't be considered in this framework?
Yeah, it's a really tough call. It's, if you're starting this from a head office role, if you like, and you have an organization that is spread throughout, like ourselves, we have a branch network that goes across the UK. I mean, to start with, you need to understand what the landscape is. Because I think if we can make that kind of decision, you understand what's out there. Is 95% of our problem Excel sheets, and we've got a couple of SQL databases sitting around, or are there more of those than we realize? So we've started by simply putting together an inventory to capture what's out there. However, we are dependent on people telling us what they have. So we've reached out throughout our organization with a tool so they can go in and answer 45 questions, simple questions about each EUDA they maintain. And your point about how do you recognize what's critical or not, I tend to say, how is the output being used? Look at the output. If you're going to be sharing information outside of your department, we need to know about it. Is the output going to be used in a subsequent formula or any calculations? We need to know about it. If it's a spreadsheet you're keeping on your PC and keeping track of your fantasy football, good for you. That's fine. So we really look at the output. That's the drive for us. Rather than thinking about all Excel sheets, all access, we're at the stage of now creating that inventory. However, we're going into this with our eyes wide open. Internally, I've quoted, I will probably find out about 25% of those that I need to know about. Because this is self-certification. Now, for many, many reasons, some people will feel embarrassed that the Excel sheet they introduced 3 years ago was a quick stopgap. They didn't get round to replacing, and they don't want to admit that there's an Excel sheet being used for their liquidity calculations. So they'll stay quiet with the best intent. They will replace it. So this is very much a service we're providing, and that's how we're saying it. We're here to help the organisation. It's very much more carrot than stick. You can't make people, but if you let people know you're here to help them get confidence that what they're doing is in a controlled environment, we can help them migrate into better technologies and tooling. The first thing is get that inventory and then pick out the slice of the pie you're going to address. You cannot do all of this. So you might focus, we're going through risk weightings of all the responses. So from the 45 questions, we can work out those critical risk and high risks. We're trying to automate that as much as we can, but we need that human element. So when we ask the questions, the one question we're dying to know is description. What is your EUDA used for? So that normally comes straight in with we need to look into this one. We've covered the need for an organisation structure to exist. So in that, I've got a couple of people working as help desk support. We've published to everybody, here's who we are and here's what we're doing. Come to us with questions. In data governance, we generally work to a triangle of technology, people and processes. And as much as the technology is essential, getting those people and processes ready to work with this is just as important. It's not the sort of thing you go into light-hearted or with any belief that you'll do something for 6 months and then it'll be done. This is not a project. It's an initiative that will never end. There's always going to be new technologies. Business will always grow more intelligent. People who bring as graduates now can do things in technology way beyond where we were 10, 15 years ago. And the ability of the organization to keep on track of those is constantly being challenged. So it's but I think it's, as much as we have to accept it's daunting, but equally we have to find that way to say, what's the first wedge of the pie? What's the second wedge of the pie? And don't make false commitments internally. Realistic expectations. Let everyone know this is a long-term thing. This is where we're doing step by step.
No, thank you, Mark. I mean, there's a couple of interesting points you raised there, which are on point as far as the regulator is concerned, in terms of consider the outputs of those end user developed applications. Certainly, those outputs, the OCC paper is very much looking at the quantitative tools that feed models. So, the outputs of these tools are going into models which are already defined as key things, and those are now part of the regulatory framework according to the OCC and the Fed. And the Dear CEO letter also looked at the way spreadsheets, again, EUDAs, play a part in the reg reporting agenda. Again, the outputs of those are being fed in and making sure that we understand the provenance of the data that flows through. Alex, if I just pick up on one of the third point, one of the other points that Mark made, in terms of self-certification and discovery. Obviously, we at Cluster 7C, some people have embarked on this journey over 10 years ago and have got quite mature programs. And I think, Mark, your point that we might only get 25% through self-certification, we've seen numbers that are very much inverted, and people are actually a lot more diligent than you'd expect. So I hope that'll play out in your analysis. But Alex, maybe just describe some of the maturity and how technology can be used, or your observations of some of the frameworks that we see and the maturity in them.
Yeah, sure. I was gonna. That was a point I was thinking about with Mark, is that sadly this isn't a 1 year event that you run and you kick off. This is a bit of an ongoing piece where I think, as you say, the person who's tucked away their little liquidity calculation next year goes, oh, okay, I actually still haven't replaced this. Maybe I do need to kind of own up to it and put it forward. So I think whilst getting getting the the definition is essential of what a EUDA is, or whether we want to call it a UDT or a EUC, whatever we're talking about, is important. That ongoing piece and having that process in there is really important. And I mean, obviously, technology can help you with that. So whether you have a more of an ongoing basis to declare those files, so rather than it becoming a big upfront exercise, you kind of say to people, right, here's 6 months, here's an amnesty, tell us what you got, you know. And if you forgot one and you suddenly run a month-end process and you realize actually it's all based on Excel, or I'm doing an Excel going into a Power BI kind of dashboard, that's fine, but you're sort of giving people that opportunity to declare. I think as you move then into the more mature phase, and I would potentially say mature is potentially 3 years in. I think it does really take quite a long time for these things to settle down and for people to get comfortable. Then yes, I think technology has a very, very useful place in helping further build that inventory piece, whether you're using something like a kind of scanning based tool to help you go and actually identify files that maybe haven't been manually declared, using technology to lead that. I think that's where it can be most effective. Of course, you can use it up front as well to help you, I guess, size the estate of things, but I think it has most impact in conjunction with that manual declaration, that working with the business, because I think much of this is about keeping the business on side. You know, this is a risk that we have to understand and reduce. We're not just going to bring technology in as a silver bullet. There needs to be a process that technology can wrap around and support.
So excellent. Thanks, Alex. Rebecca, if we go to the next slide, I think one of the things that again Mark alluded to, and I think Andy also, is the technology, the availability of technology to our end users today. You know, and I always use the example when I started work. The internet was in its infancy. I didn't have email, and I think I was just given a PC to work at. Certainly fax machines were in, which if you've ever tried to explain to your children what a fax machine is, it's quite amusing. But you know, these days, you know, graduates come out of university with coding skills. You know, if you give them a problem, they're unlikely to open up a spreadsheet to solve it. They're likely to open up their favorite script base, probably Python, and start coding something in order to be able to solve a problem. So you know, we're now faced with an interesting landscape where the people who are running businesses don't understand a lot of the technology that is available to their workers, and they are through the prism of EUDAs. They are now creating EUDAs in these technologies, and it's something that we need, that our frameworks that Andy described earlier and we've just been talking about need to consider, not just, you know, those who have got mature frameworks probably considered only sort of spreadsheets and access databases. They now need to start considering these other applications or these other technologies that are in the hands of end users. I guess, Andy, coming back to you again, is this something that you're seeing at your clients, and you know, how they're looking to address that, and what's your advice to them, I suppose?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we are starting to see is the increased choice of low code, no code technologies, which people from the business can pick up very easily, start developing, connect various different data sources to, and basically build and use going forwards. And what we're finding is that actually some of these things that they're able to sort of spin up and build and start using, the governance around that is pretty weak, because they're not supported by IT. So initially IT aren't going to be, you know, aware or have visibility of those things, and by the time they do have that visibility and awareness, you know, the business has been using that particular application for, you know, months, if not even years as well. A good example is, you know, using people starting to have access to Microsoft's, you know, suite of Power Platforms. So it's in this yellow column here that we have, where you can start using Power BI, where you can connect up to various different, you know, data sources from the back end. So ranging from Excel, Access, SQL databases, etc. You can connect up to Power BI, do business analysis. You can, you know, start using Power Query, and sort of all the various different sort of visualization that you can do to manipulate and update the data itself, and then have that then connected to other areas like Power Automate, PowerApps, etc. So what you get is a web of various different EUDAs, which are low-code, no-code technology that you can connect up to different data sources. And again, that has implications for security and access to data within your organization. And from what people can see as an end user, they can see something which is, very easy to sort of operate and use. But actually, the implications of that is that you get that web of various different EUDAs connected now. And with that connectivity comes sort of the risky elements of actually making sure that you have that right data, the data integrity and completeness, and everything else to manage your EUDAs going forwards. So I think we do see that with the course of these new sort of EUDAs that are coming into play itself, it's not just about your standard spreadsheets and databases or even sort of programmable languages. It's now things like these low code, no code applications where you can actually start building very quickly and start using within the organization before you have good governance around it and before IT can actually effectively help and support on that. And we see that with some of the robotic process automation tools as well, like Blue Prism, UiPath, where again, you can program up your robots to be able to access various different files and folders within your organization, pull out that data and use that to be able to then sort of either report on or produce actual reports and things for consumption by other teams as well. And again, there needs to be consideration about how does the change management process work for those things? How does the access policy and controls work? Because you're not giving access to a person, but you're actually giving access to a robot who, in theory, could be compromised if there are ways around it, and therefore these sort of things need to be considered as part of building out your EUDA framework itself. And it's what we're now starting to see is that expansion from just spreadsheets and databases to these more complex EUDAs, which people can actually start using and sort of sharing easier and quicker as well. And that's especially true in this day where the majority of us are sort of working remotely more often as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Andy, just summarize what you said. I mean, it's I think the one of the problems with EUDA programs in the past has been the concept that it's just a spreadsheet. Okay, so everybody just worries it was just a spreadsheet. The reality is, and something that I think we've always tried to explain to people is, look, forget the container it's produced in, whether it's a spreadsheet or access database. Fundamentally, you have got, as defined in your policy, an application or a process rather that has been run by an application that's developed outside of IT standard controls. What I think, and that's the basis of a EUDA policy and a framework. What these new technologies highlight is that it's not just a spreadsheet. It's the fact that this process is run by, as I say, an application developed outside of IT's control, and I think that potentially the genesis of these new technologies might actually reinforce the fact that the EUDAs exist in the organization and they need to be I guess they need to be addressed. That risk needs to be addressed more fully, because whereas we talked about a spreadsheet before, people go, oh, it's just a spreadsheet. Now, if you talk about Python, certainly someone like me, I'm going, oh, that's scary because I have no idea what Python is. You ask my son, it's easy. I guess, Mark, as someone who's embarking on this journey, is the concept of these other applications in the hands of end users more daunting, or does it, as I've described, make it easier to explain the risk to people?
It makes it easier to explain the risk. A line I've used a couple of times is, if we go back 10 years from my data governance world, the conversation was always about how do we bridge the gap between the IT departments and the business. The reality, though, is that the business has now become a many siloed IT department. So the concept of shadow IT existing is now exponentially growing. As you said, those graduates are now able to come in and introduce coding. So it is more daunting, but at the same time, it really helps explain the risks that you're carrying. So it helps you get your BVOs or your request for ROI, because you can really nail down that risk once you find those core examples that you're working with. And I think, to touch on another point you mentioned about the need for our EUDA strategy and framework, with that in mind, to what I've just said, you've also got to go back and work with your IT strategy. I guess in all organizations, we've got a business strategy, an IT strategy, and you should have a data strategy. Now, a EUDA strategy, to my mind, comes in as the fourth player in this. And those other three have got to be updated and collaborated with that EUDA strategy. You can't go away and see it as a standalone thing. You need to revisit what your IT strategy says and say, well, okay, how do we overlap these things? We can't carry on a path where we just accept the business is going to do these things and leave IT behind. There should be an opportunity to upscale what your IT services are, really. If this is technology that's been brought in by the business and IT feels they're behind, they've got to be brought on the journey. So that's the sell to your IT world as well.
Yeah, I think that you make a good point there, Mark, that the data we're capturing is part of this inventory should not just be considered a compliance exercise that we need to have a list of where all these EUDAs are. It should be considered that this is going to feed into, as you say, your IT strategy and support other parts of the business. And actually, by starting to get visibility on this, it's going to make everyone's lives a hell of a lot easier.
I think one of the things that we've seen in the past is, with a EUDA project, it tends to be, you do it for sort of a year to 18 months, and then sort of you hand it over, and it sort of, hopefully it sort of can sustain itself. But what we often see with a lot of our clients is it goes on for sort of 2-3 years, and it sort of slowly dies down. But where we normally have, a risk function or an IT risk function where you're managing sort of certain things like third-party risk or operational risk, EUDA risk should be seen that way as an ongoing thing as well, because we need to make sure that it's sustainable and it keeps going, and you have people there to be able to monitor and sort of help identify and also retire new and old EUDAs, so that you're still being able to keep an eye on all those various different EUDAs, the types of inventory and the complexity, and where the data is being used as well. Because I think from a data governance point of view, you have data within those systems that are supported by IT, but actually with EUDAs themselves, as you see, there's lots of different types of EUDAs now, that the data being used is less governed from that perspective, and the EUDA sort of initiative helps identify that and almost sort of combine it with what's happening from an IT perspective as well, because it typically isn't as supported as much, and it should be going forwards, because there's a lot of data held in various different types of EUDAs, ranging from spreadsheets to programmable language, RPA tools, and BI reporting tools as well.
Yeah, I think one of the maturities we've certainly seen in the EUDA governance programs is the alignment of those the EUDA programs with the model risk programs. Again, picking up on the point that Mark made earlier and you just remade now, is a lot of the data in these EUDAs is users aren't doing this for their own good. They're creating data sets that are required by the organization typically to be fed up. Again, go back to Mark's earlier comments, I worry about the outputs. Well, if Alex is creating this wonderful bit of Python code and manipulating data, where's it going? Well, actually, it's feeding into one of our core capital model calculations. Then clearly, the model may well be under governance. We should probably be controlling the that source as well, which leads us back to the insurance initiative and Solvency II. So all of these things are consistent in terms of looking at, and go back to Basel, the risk data aggregation. It's all about understanding the lineage of that data and extending the purview of the controls outside of the core modeling sphere into that EUDA sphere. But again, picking up on your point, Rebecca, if we go to the next slide, in order to make this sustainable, one of the things, if you have any scale in this, whether it's just if you're looking beyond a single department into multiple departments, multiple geographies, certainly we've found, and obviously we have a technology that helps organisations bring this to life, and again, to Alex's point, make this sustainable. So, as Mark said, this is not a one-off project. This is something that needs to be embedded into the infrastructure of the organisation. We need stakeholders to be engaged to get something from it, but also then to be able to ensure that all of those stakeholders are aware of the extent of our dependence on end user computing, where it connects into the modelling world, and where controls are defined are effective or not. Alex, maybe could you just introduce this section, just give people sort of a 101 on how effectively technology can help organisations in navigate this quagmire that is EUDAs.
Yeah, so I guess what we're looking at here is kind of two views on things, and ultimately, I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is about making all the data we have available to lots of people, if that's what we need to do, making sure people are aware of different processes that exist, and trying to break down those silos of where information goes to one part of the business and another, and then it actually all aggregates up. So, what we're looking at on the left-hand side, screenshot there, is looking at kind of linkages between files. So in this case, I think we're looking at a kind of spreadsheet linkages. So you've got one file in the middle that is actually taking data from several other files kind of further down the levels there. Being able to visualize that in a kind of automated way can really start to get people to think about, okay, well, that middle file is my process. I hadn't really thought that there's probably 3 or 4 other people contributing to my data in the middle there, and I hadn't really been able to kind of draw it out. So this again gives me that visibility on what's there, but also gets other people considering around what could be in scope of that EUDA piece and what feeds up. So that helps, I think, in either the initial investigation of the inventory, but also in that that ongoing kind of maturity of the inventory as people start to kind of get on board with it. The other side, we're then looking more at the reporting side of things, and I think here again, this is really important for senior management to understand kind of what is out there. If we can start to categorize and make clear, the different applications we have and the criticality ratings of some of those, people can really start to understand that overall level of risk that is there, and start to be able to drill down into that, understand why we've got a number of applications being developed in one department. Perhaps that department has been underfunded from an IT perspective for a number of years, or looking at maybe they've got a couple of quite intelligent kind of developers in one area, and they've been really, they've got to grips with something like with Python, and they've kind of gone off and done that. So again, giving that visibility, allowing different parts of the business to make their own interpretation of the same data, I think again helps this overall piece and allows people to start to make much more informed decisions on what's there. And again, all of this is then there to be set up on an ongoing basis. So the report we might look at here could be something we run monthly, or it's something I can go and fire up in Tableau or Power BI to view on a regular basis. So that if I want to go and see what's happening in fixed income, I can go and see that there's 12 EUDAs there, of which 3 are built in spreadsheets, 4 are in Python, and the rest are a selection of other things. So it's just about how that technology can support the process. The one caveat I would say with all of this is you can't just turn the technology on and implement it and off it goes. It is there to support a process, not to just be a silver bullet. So there are lots of techniques that can help, but it's not just like, we'll switch it on and we're all good, thanks. Henry, on mute.
Thank you. You think you'd learn after 18 months. Andy, so I mean, you've seen firms set up frameworks. Some implement technology and some not. Are there any sort of top tips that you would give firms when looking at potentially utilizing technology to support their frameworks?
Yeah, I think one of the things I would sort of recommend is think about what your process is, and where you want to be able to use that technology. You can often find sort of technology can exist in all the different levels of the EUDA end-to-end process itself, whether it's using technology to perform an e-discovery of your inventory of EUDAs within an organization, whether it's doing one-off exercises to review the state of individual EUDAs themselves, so using technology to be able to identify things like hidden formulas, hidden cells, worksheets, etc. You can also use technology to be able to track individual EUDAs and the changes that are applied to those EUDAs. And this is especially important when you have more complex models where you have lots of different types of data feeding in, lots of data, different calculations, etc. That sort of automated change management process is vital, because when it's complex and you're doing quite a lot of changes to your model, you need to be able to record that information from a auditing point of view, and you can implement sort of manual sort of change logs, etc. But the technology helps if you have got more complex changes that you need to put through, because it allows you to be able to sort of compare previous versions to new versions, and see exactly where those changes are, what numbers it impacts, etc. as well. And finally, using technology from a reporting perspective as well. And again, from reporting itself, you can report on high levels around your inventory of EUDAs, to reporting on the risk values of individual EUDAs or EUDAs within a department or a team, to then drilling down even further and reporting on actual individual EUDAs and where they may have gaps based on the review that you've used for the from a technology perspective. So you can have different levels of reporting from that perspective as well. And if where do you want to use that technology, you can then select the right vendor for you to be able to then bring in and use it from that perspective. Is it going to be just for the reporting point of view, or is it going to be sort of across the board where you can sort of make best use of it as well?
Yeah, and I think Alex mentioned it earlier. I mean, technology is not a silver bullet. It does come back to that initial policy piece. So, one of the biggest mistakes we've seen is, it's an EUDA, so these are all the controls you put on it. No, we should have some the appropriatenesses of controls, and therefore typically will have a EUDA that's high risk, medium risk, low risk, and depending on that risk categorization, there are different controls required. Some of which you've described, which is we need to have detailed change control around, when I make changes to formulas within the spreadsheet itself or within the application, as you would with any other IT application as you went through a change program. So just because that process is run by end users, why do we not have the similar IT controls, which goes through a review and approval process? And one of the other key things that I guess technology does highlight, and one thing that we is the key man risk. One of the things that is always gets people in the EUDA world is it's Mark knows everything about it, he's been around forever, and he's left and suddenly realized 5 of our key processes now don't work. Mark, I'm not picking on you, but I think I'm interested in your views on technology, and then probably going to the last slide and then linking this back to regulation. Do you have any final words on the technology piece?
No, I think Alex and Andy covered it really well. I think I would just reiterate that need for making sure you've got your people and process in place to support the technology and do it step by step. If you chuck in technology, it highlights 10,000 things that exist you should be concerned about. Where do you start?
Yeah.
You haven't got a process to work out what are the high risk ones, what are the low risk ones, and that needs business engagement to understand how are you using this. So I think technology is, I said earlier, it's essential, but it has to be supported by that the process that's going to work with it.
Yeah, and that's highlighted very well. And most people would think about kicking off one of these programs as doing lots of discovery. Let's try and size the problem and using technology to find that. Perversely, we actually find more people using the discovery capabilities now with very mature programs. Because actually what you should be doing, as you said, is setting out your policies, your procedures, get everything that is owned up to in. Your point that people only declare 25%, our experience is people declare a lot more than that into the process. People who have got mature programs are now, if we go to the next slide, Rebecca, because of some of the regulatory drivers, are now going back to that discovery to test the veracity of the inventory using the discovery capabilities. Look, well, I declared this model, but actually those feeder files that feed in that technology can identify, should they be part of it? And because of some of the regulations, whether it was the BCBS 239 or some of the latest OCC model risk initiatives, they're starting to call out those feeder files and making sure that we understand the provenance of that data, which I guess, Mark, goes back to your journey on this in the whole data governance world. And maybe you could talk to your views on, a lot of these initiatives, whether we like it or not, are paid for by regulatory drivers. So those regulatory initiatives can only be successful if we understand all of the components of it. And our belief and the subject today is that EUDAs form a key part of a lot of those regulatory initiatives, and therefore, as organisations look to address them, should consider the EUDA issue.
Absolutely. I mean, from a data governance side, generally we hate using regulations as a driving force. Because you know what? People in the business have had years now being told, you've got to do this for head office because of a regulation. We need to bridge that gap and say, actually, this will help you. It'll help you work with users in confidence. You want this. We want to provide you a help function. The regulatory returns and oversight will improve as a result of that. But we try not to make that be the driver, because it just turns people off, quite frankly, really. So we know why we're doing it back in head office. But again, it's that business engagement and how you explain it to them. I think when we go through gathering that first inventory, it's essential to link those outputs to those processes that we can see have a link to a regulatory underlying demand, because that is your best internal sell to senior management, because they will get the regulatory requirements. So I think being able to analyze those EUDAs and understand actually that will be part of BCBS, or a lot of the challenges I have are things like or awkward internal conversation around GDPR. How many projects have any organization run where they've taken an extract of customer data into a spreadsheet for analysis and understanding, but they didn't bother deleting it? So they have a file of customer data sitting on a drive somewhere. 4 years later, some of those people may have left the relationship with the organization. They are no longer customers. You now have people, personal information on your system. Now, I can't think how a regulator would come in and enforce something like that, but it's certainly something to be mindful of and be aware of. So it's the awareness of all the different regulations that affect your organization is critical, so you can draw the link between what seems like an innocent EUDA and how it could be used from that perspective.
Excellent. Andy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think as Mark alluded to, you need to be able to sort of bridge the gap between the two different audiences, so to speak. One where you've got your senior management, and you need to be able to say, look, they understand from a regulatory perspective what needs to be done and why. So you need to be mindful of that as you communicate and have convey that message to the senior management, saying we're doing these things because of these regulations, and therefore this is what we need, and this is how we're going to do it. Now, on the other hand, the on the other side of things, it's the business where as you say, they're probably aware that yes, you need to be able to do this because of the regulations, but actually, you know, really realistically for them, it's like what's in it for us? You know, we're having to do all this extra work, put these extra things in place because of regulations, but actually if we're able to sell it to them through communicating to them and saying, look, we can optimize your UDAs because of these best practice standards XYZ, you can, you know, make your models run quicker, faster, more efficiently, easier to navigate and use as well and understand. It means that they've got some, you know, some incentive to be able to say, yes, you know, I've got these UDAs. I want to be able to make sure that I can apply some of these best practices and things so that it's easier for me to run and sort of manage and do as well. And sometimes it's often the case that, you know, you might be able to, with the, you know, with the right help and support, consolidate up your UDAs and, you know, you could get rid of like 10 spreadsheets, for example, and put it into one system, which allows you to then be able to focus on that easily rather than manage lots of different things. So you need to be able to have the right form of communication, as Mark says, to sell it to them and say, you know, these are the positive things that you can get out of it, and that will then sort of, you know, convince them to be able to do it. Because it's like that old saying, you know, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So you can have as many of these different initiatives, controls, tools and everything else that you can use, but if the business aren't willing to engage or sort of, you know, buy into it, it becomes extremely difficult to maintain it going forwards as well.
On that, actually, if I could just something we've been focusing on and very mindful of is the communication strategy of this is essential. So some of the things we're looking at are bringing this into induction training. We're working on an internal video for people, top tips, guides, how to securitize things. We're issuing a handbook. As much as we want those policies and frameworks, let's be honest, they're pretty dry documents, and people generally refer to them when they have to. So one thing we're looking to do is get out a handbook, a 5-page light handbook in layman's terms. The most important thing for us as a central part of the organization is tell people that you exist. We are here. Come to us with questions. Come to us with challenges. Come to us if you see something that you don't feel comfortable at, and we will help you. That's essential to reach out to those people that are actually working with the EUDAs.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, so we've seen examples of firms that have been proactive the way Mark's talked about and embedding it in their organization's psyche. I mean, maybe you should share a few of those.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind is, you know, having the sort of EUDA ownership sit alongside more of the sort of the application development teams. So those teams that are helping to refine, tidy up. If anyone's got, you know, any spreadsheet developers or other people that kind of help build things out, having that team there. So it's like, well, actually, I'm going to declare all my EUDAs because I'd like someone to help me tidy them up. And I think it's again what Andy's talked about is, can we use that carrot to get people to engage with this? And when the regulatory questions come round and people ask about them, you're like, well, oh, we actually did that already, but we didn't do it because of that. We did it because we wanted to tidy up our spreadsheets. So it's changing that psyche and changing that way of thinking. To come back to the induction point, though, which I thought was quite interesting. In a lot of our clients we talk to, they're all being now given, all the new grads are being given training on Power BI, on you know, they're having, you know, a 2-hour, 3-hour engagement on SQL and things like Python. I think there needs to be that same session that says, we're giving you the ability to create all these applications, but there is a means to do so, and there is a controlled environment in which you're meant to do these. And I think if we can start to build that psyche, that thinking into people as they come through, the culture will change. And I think a lot of this is about culture and people being comfortable to carry on doing these things, but doing it in a way that reduces the risk to the organization.
I'm very mindful of time, gentlemen. There's one question in from Philip around test and trace and EUDA risk. I'm not aware of that one. I'm not sure if either of you three are, and whether that any insights coming out of the test and trace EUDA issue. I'm not sure of, not one I'm aware of.
It's the it was the incident where I think based on an old version of Excel, the number of users in the
the rows, number of rows, yes. Yes, the classic, run, 64,000 rows. Again, I think yes, understanding that application making sure, I mean, again, technology does a simple check is the data getting to the end of the spreadsheet. On the modern one, that's over 1 million rows, so that's quite useful. So yes, technology can help with that. But again, it's understanding the appropriateness of the technology you're using for solving that problem. So, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Some closing remarks. Mark, can you start yourself, sir?
How do we sum this all up? I think it's if you're on the journey or you're starting the journey, find the piece you want to start with, focus on an area without trying to do it all at once. Yes, technology will help, but get your organizational structure together. You've got the right people in the right place to work with the technology.
Thank you, Mark. Alex?
So I would say where the projects I've seen be most successful, I think, as Mark has mentioned, is getting that definition as well defined as possible. Now, there's challenges with that because you don't want to go too tight, and you also don't want to go too loose with this because you'll end up getting too many things. But I think it's being sensible ultimately. You know, working with the business to define what that definition is. The challenge comes with all these new tools that, whether they're in or out, put them in. If it doesn't work, you can take them out. But as long as you're not over controlling them, I think it will work. But getting that visibility of what's there is important.
Thank you, Andy.
My takeaway is, as Mark says, you know, take it in bite-sized chunks rather than looking at everything going, there's too much for us to do, and therefore we're going to sort of brush it under the carpet and not address it until something goes wrong. I think people need to be proactive about it, and the best way to do that is, you know, shorter pilot maybe review sessions and things, so that you can say, okay, let's take one department, have a look at some key processes, identify some of your critical and high risk EUDAs. Let's put something in place, and if that's, you know, if that works as well, let's, you know, look to roll that out wider across the organization.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'll conclude, thank you for all those final comments, gentlemen, is, you know, EUDA risk is not going to go away. It's human nature. The IT can't keep up with the speed of the business. So, you know, organizations should address it, should recognize, as we said, that it's gone beyond spreadsheets to other weird technologies. And in 5 years' time, we'll be talking about a lot more that we don't know about today. But thank you very much indeed for your time. I hope everybody else has enjoyed the session, and enjoy the rest of the day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers all.
Thank you.